Are you ready to meditate with Cory? Lay down, get comfortable. Make sure everything's right in your room. Tonight's story is going back to visit Mr and Mrs Littlebottom's farm, deep in a village in the middle of England. I have to tell you a story about a pig called Jake. Jake had a very unusual friend. A friend that nobody knew about. He was very, very secret, very unusual, and only Jake could hear him. For the past year, Jake had had a friend that lived on his back called Ben. Ben was a chameleon. That's why no one knew about Ben. Ben could change his color and the texture of his skin to fit in and blend in so that no one could see him. He was very good at being disguised. And had been friends with Jake for around about a year. Now, it was good that Jake had Ben, because, if I'm really honest, Jake was a bit of a troubled little pig. He was troubled in a way that sometimes he could be a little bit naughty. Some of the things that Jake would do on that farm weren't really very nice. And the whole time that Ben the chameleon had lived on Jake's back, he'd been trying to get Jake to change his ways and be a nicer pig. But Ben didn't have much luck, and Jake just carried on being Jake. Some of the things that Jake would get up to, for example, whenever he could, he would sneak his way into the chicken coop and scare all of the chickens by making lots of noise and running around really quickly. And when they all got scared, they would fly up in the air and run away from where they were laying their eggs. And Jake would have a lot of eggs for breakfast. Poor chickens obviously didn't think very much of Jake. And he would do this maybe 2 times a week. He'd come in, scare them all, and then eat all of their eggs. And when he would do it, Ben would say, as if he was his conscience, talking to him all the time, "Jake, that wasn't very nice. That's not a very nice thing to do. It's not nice because those chickens spent a lot of time laying their eggs. And scaring the chickens is not a nice thing to do." And Jake would feel a little bit guilty, but then he'd get over it really quickly, and it seemed he would just do it over and over again. The other thing he liked to do that wasn't a very nice thing to do was he liked to run in the field where all of the cows were and see if it could scare the cows and make them fall over. Somehow Jake thought that was funny. Ben the whole time would say, "Jake, don't do that to the cows. Those poor cows are just eating the grass, minding their own business, and here you are scaring them like that. That's not very nice, Jake." And Jake would feel a tinsy-wincy bit bad, but then he would do it the following week, as if he couldn't remember anything that Ben, his friend, had told him. He liked to scare all the ducks off the pond. And one thing he did where he always upset Mrs. Littlebottom was eat her flowers. He would wait till her flowers in her flower garden were just right. They were perfect, they were fully in bloom, they were pretty, and they smelt really good. And just when Mrs. Littlebottom would get the opportunity to enjoy them and see them every day, Jake would come along and eat them. And he'd squish all of her flowers. And the whole time Ben would say, "Jake, that's not nice. You shouldn't do that to Mrs. Littlebottom's flowers. She's taken such care of them. That's not a nice thing to do, Jake." Because Mr and Mrs Littlebottom loved their animals so much, Jake always got away with it. And they always had their doors open, so some of the animals would just walk through the kitchen. And Mr and Mrs Littlebottom was okay with that. They were used to that. Somehow, though, Jake always knew when Mrs. Littlebottom had mopped her kitchen floor. And he would purposefully roll in the mud and get all dirty and then walk on her clean floors in the kitchen. And Ben, the whole time, would perch himself behind Jake's ear and say, "Jake, don't do that to Mrs. Littlebottom. She just spent all that time cleaning her floors, and there you go, bringing dirt into the house. That's not very nice, Jake." It seemed to Ben like Jake would never ever change. And yet he wanted to help him, and he was still his friend, and he didn't want to give up on his friend. But it seemed like he would never ever listen and never ever change. Until one day, Ben, the chameleon, had a wonderful idea. He decided that every time Jake the pig would do something that wasn't very nice, from now on he wouldn't let Jake run away. The thing was, Jake would do something naughty or do something bad, and then he'd run away. And when he ran away, he never saw the consequences of his actions. Ben thought that Jake needed to see what happened to the other people every time he was naughty or not very nice. Jake made his way into the chicken coop, scared all of the chickens, took all of their eggs and ate their eggs, and started to make his way out of the chicken coop. Ben pulled on his ear and said, "You need to sit. You need to sit and watch this. It's for your own good, my friend." Jake sat down where none of the chickens could see him, and he watched. The chickens spent a long time cleaning up the mess that Jake had created. They talked to each other, they hugged each other and told each other it would be okay. They would lay more eggs. Jake's just been Jake. It was a long time before the chicken coop was all in order again, and all of the chickens had calmed down and got themselves comfortable again. And for the first time, Jake saw this, and he didn't feel good at all. Jake did his usual thing and ran through the fields, tried to scare the cows. One or two of them fell over, they were so scared. And Ben said, you're not going anywhere. You need to sit and watch and see the consequences of your actions. Jake sat and watched where the cows couldn't see him. And one of the cows in particular was very, very sad. I don't understand why Jake's so mean. Why does he have to be so mean? All the other cows tried to comfort the really, really sad cow. Jake saw this and felt bad. Bad for scaring the cows. Yet it still wasn't enough. He rolled around in a big muddy puddle and walked through Mrs. Littlebottom's kitchen and then walked out the other door. And Ben the chameleon pulled on his ear and said, you sit and watch. If you don't sit and watch, Jake, then things are never ever going to change. So Jake sat and watched where Mrs. Littlebottom couldn't see him. She sighed. She started to talk to herself. Maybe it's not a good idea that I leave my door open for all of the animals. Maybe it's not a good idea that I let Jake roam around freely and do what he pleases on the farm. Maybe things have to change. And he watched as Mrs. Littlebottom spent an hour cleaning up all the mud, the splashes on the kitchen counters. It seemed to be on the walls, all over the floor. It took her an hour. And when she sat down, she stretched her back. And for the first time, Jake looked at her and saw that she wasn't that young anymore, and that Mrs. Littlebottom really didn't need to be mopping and cleaning like Jake was making her. And he felt really, really sad about his actions. Ben the chameleon said, "Now, do you see? Every action you have as a reaction in someone else. Every action you do creates a reaction with someone or something else. It's time for you to start to think about your actions, Jake. I know you're a good pig. I know you can be a good friend. It's time to be a good friend to everyone else on this farm. No more not being nice, Jake. Think before you do something. Think about your actions. They were very, very wise words that Ben shared with Jake that day. And it took Jake a couple of days to think about all of the times he'd not been a very nice pig, all of the things that could come across as being mean and not caring and being naughty. And there were many, many things that came to his mind. But after a couple of days, all he could hear was his little friend telling him, "I know you're a good pig. I know you're a good friend." And he hung on to those words, and he decided to change. He decided that if he wanted to be treated like a friend and treated like a nice pig, then he had to be like that with all of the other animals. He had to be what he wanted to be treated like. He had to change. And he did. Still to this day, Ben the Chameleon hangs out on Jake the pig's back. And still to this day, no one knows he's there because he's so good at camouflaging himself. And still to this day, they're very good friends. And thanks to Ben for loving him and sticking by Jake, even when he wasn't a very nice boy or a very nice pig. Jake always knew that he had someone that had his back, someone that cared about him, and that made him care about himself. The end. I'd like you to close your eyes and imagine that you're laying on the grass underneath the sun. You can feel the grass underneath your body. And if you listen carefully, you can hear the birds and maybe the occasional cow and chicken and pig in the background. Start to let your body sink into the earth and get heavy and relax. You can hear the water in a stream close by, trickling over the rocks. It's very calming and relaxing. The sun shining down on your face and your body, saying hello. Right now, you don't have to be anywhere but laying on the grass, chilling in the sunshine, listening to the birds, and the water, just watching the clouds roll by. can feel the grass underneath your skin. Feel soft and warm. There's a slight breeze in the air, just a little breeze, enough to cool your skin as it blows by. And the longer you lay here, the more you let your body fall into a deeper state of relaxation. It's peaceful and quiet. It's the perfect place to be, to take a little nap. You can imagine you're just like Ben, the chameleon, able to change your color and your skin so that no one can see you, blending into the grass and the floor like you're completely invisible to the rest of the world. Falling to sleep now. Just let your body fall. Your muscles, your bones. Let everything fall to sleep.